What if I told you there once lived a king, so tragically malformed that even his own subjects whispered, oh, he had been touched by the devil? Meet Charles II of Spain, a monarch whose twisted fate and grotesque appearance made even his most loyal courtiers question whether his soul had been cursed. They didn't call him El Hechizado, the bewitched, for nothing. But the most terrifying truth, Charles wasn't bewitched by sorcery. No, he was the ultimate victim of something far more monstrous, his own bloodline. This is the haunting tale of how the mightiest dynasty in Europe, obsessed with preserving its power, condemned one of its sons to a life of pain, humiliation, and supernatural suspicion. A king whose final autopsy revealed deformities so grotesque, they seemed to confirm every dark rumor whispered behind closed doors. Ready to step into a story that history books shy away from? Then hold on tight, because we're diving into the twisted depths of royal power, one terrifying truth at a time. Imagine being the ruler of the greatest empire on earth and not being able to close your own mouth. That was Charles II's reality. When foreign ambassadors first laid eyes on him, many recoiled. This was the King of Spain. His jaw jutted so far forward his lips couldn't touch. His mouth remained open, perpetually slack, like a broken door hinge. And the cause wasn't chance. It was calculated inbreeding 2 centuries of the Habsburg obsession with pure blood. The Habsburgs had a rule: marry only within the family. Over time, cousins wed cousins, uncles wed nieces, and the family tree didn't branch, it looped. Charles's parents, uncle and niece. His grandparents, also uncle and niece. Genetically, Charles had the diversity of someone stranded on a remote island for generations. The result, a severely deformed jaw. What modern doctors call mandibular prognathism, and what everyone else called the Habsburg Jaw. Charles's teeth didn't align. His upper and lower rows sat behind one another, leaving a gap wide enough to pass a coin through. Chewing was impossible. So every meal was pureed, mashed, liquefied. Still food would spill from his mouth, soup would drip down his chin, and servants had to constantly wipe him clean. But it didn't end there. His speech nearly incomprehensible. Every royal command sounded like a wet slur. Diplomats needed translators not for language, but to decode the king's garbled words. Even his own advisors couldn't always understand him. His mother, Queen Mariana, wrote in despair that she feared Charles might choke to death on his own tongue in his sleep. The King of Spain, a choking hazard. And the Habsburgs knew. They saw the deformities worsening with each generation. But they didn't stop. Why? Because power was worth more than the lives of their children. Charles was a living sacrifice at the altar of dynasty. If the jaw was grotesque, the rest of Charles's body was a tragedy sculpted by genetics. At 35, Charles looked not like a man, but a child warped by suffering. He was barely 5 feet tall. His head, swollen and oversized, teetered on a frail neck. His limbs were stick-thin, his torso misshapen and compressed. His spine so crooked he seemed hunched beneath an invisible burden. He couldn't walk until the age of 8. While most children ran by their first birthday, Charles crawled for nearly a decade. When he did walk, it was a stumbling shuffle, his body too weak to hold itself upright. Palace records describe him lurching from wall to wall, using furniture to stay upright like an elderly man in his twilight years. Except Charles was in his supposed prime. But even more devastating was his mind. He didn't learn to read until 10, and comprehension remained minimal. Tutors described teaching him as pouring water into a broken cup. Nothing stuck. Emotionally, he was an overgrown toddler, prone to tantrums, screaming fits, and complete shutdowns. He'd sit for hours, unmoving, staring into nothing unreachable. Even his hair betrayed him, thin, patchy, falling out in clumps, leaving his scalp blotchy like the pelt of a diseased animal. Court painters tried to mask his deformities in portraits. But the truth couldn't be hidden. Not forever. And here's the most chilling part. Charles wasn't plateauing. He was deteriorating. While most people mature and stabilize, Charles's body was crumbling in real time. Muscles wasting, organs weakening. A man aging like time itself was trying to erase him. Medicine had no answers. And so the whispers of witchcraft only grew louder. A monarch's most basic duty: produce an heir. Charles failed. He married twice. First, Marie-Louise of Orléans, a radiant French princess who arrived full of hope and found herself shackled to a child-man. Their wedding night was a catastrophe. Servants later recounted how Marie-Louise emerged in tears, Charles confused and distressed. The truth: Charles's sexual development had been so stunted his organs resembled those of a young boy. He was biologically incapable of consummation. But instead of admitting the king's impotence, the court blamed the queen. Marie-Louise was humiliated, forced to drink bitter concoctions, undergo painful procedures, and endure constant scrutiny for failing to conceive what her husband couldn't deliver. The vivacious young queen faded into depression, living in prayer, begging for a miracle that would never come. She died mysteriously at 26, perhaps poisoned slowly by the fertility cures inflicted upon her. Charles married again Maria Anna of Neuburg, but the second union was just as hopeless. She too wrote of her horror and the impossibility of producing an heir. Doctors, priests, even alchemists were summoned. Nothing worked, because nothing could. Charles's dysfunction wasn't curable. It was written into his bones, his blood, his very being. And while the Spanish court scrambled for miracles, the rest of Europe watched preparing for war. Because everyone knew once Charles died heirless, the Spanish throne would be a battlefield. And it was. The War of Spanish Succession erupted, drowning Europe in blood for over a decade. One man's infertility triggered a continental disaster. When science failed, the court turned to faith, or rather, fear. The church declared Charles possessed, and what followed were some of the most bizarre exorcisms in royal history. Not in hidden chapels, but in the throne room. With nobles watching, priests shouted Latin incantations, while Charles writhed on the floor, foaming at the mouth, convulsing as holy water mixed with crushed relics was forced down his throat. He vomited violently. Priests called it demons fleeing. Crucifixes were pressed to his skin until he screamed. His body, already fragile, was twisted and bruised under the guise of holy healing. Even the palace itself was exorcised. In 1698, priests burned royal gifts, furniture, and relics in courtyard bonfires, anything that might be cursed. And Charles, he believed it helped. His fragile mind clung to hope. When pain subsided, however briefly, he begged for more exorcisms. By 1618, the chief exorcist claimed to have expelled 47 demons, each responsible for a specific affliction: blindness, impotence, madness. After the final exorcism, Charles collapsed and didn't speak for 3 days. He was being tortured in the name of healing, all while his body continued to rot from the inside out. Charles died in 1700 at just 38. The autopsy findings were deemed so horrifying that the Spanish court tried to suppress them. But the truth bled out. His heart shriveled black and no larger than a walnut. His lungs corroded, gangrenous, oozing putrid fluid. His intestines rotting inside his body. His reproductive organs so underdeveloped they looked prepubescent. And his brain, surrounded by fluid, what we now know as hydrocephalus, damaged and discolored, explaining his mental decline. One physician wrote, "It is a miracle this body sustained life for so long. Not a single organ was whole." The autopsy confirmed what so many had feared. Charles II wasn't cursed by devils or witches. He was cursed by blood. His own blood. Also, the result of centuries of inbreeding by a family so obsessed with control, they doomed their legacy to destruction. And that destruction came swiftly. Charles died without an heir, and Europe erupted into war. The dynasty that had ruled for centuries fell because of one man, twisted, broken, innocent. Charles II of Spain. A tragic reminder that the greatest threats to power don't always come from outside. Sometimes they're born within. If stories like this shake you to your core, hit that like button, subscribe for more untold history, and tell me, what royal mysteries should we unravel next?